Hey guys. So we're going to do a quick review of everything we've done over the past 3 weeks, and then start with talking about how speciation actually occurs, not only in penguins, but in other species as well. So this little cute guy, oh, look at him. That's a Humboldt penguin. That's the kind that the Milwaukee County Zoo has. And actually, the Milwaukee County Zoo has a penguin cam. So if you ever just want to like watch penguins swim around, go to their website. You can watch the penguins swim around. Kind of cool. All right. So we are going to review these basic things that we've talked about. So we've talked about taxonomic classification. You guys watched a video all about how we classify different animals and that their scientific name is made up of the last two. So their genus and their species. So with penguins specifically, they are in the animal kingdom. They are of the phylum Chordata, class Aves, so it's everything with birds. And then if we keep going down, they are, of course, flightless birds. And then there are 6 different genuses or genera of penguins, and with that, there are 17 to 20 living species. We don't quite know all the species of penguins that are currently living because we would have to like monitor every single one of their populations. And a lot of them, their populations are so small that we don't know if they are still in existence for some of them. Or, as we talked about before, we can have two animals that look exactly the same, but they're actually different species, and we don't know until we actually get DNA from them. So that's why a lot of times with species, there's like a little bit of a range because we just don't know, which I think is kind of cool that in science we can admit that we don't know stuff. So when we're looking at this, all of the different penguins are in that same family, but then we get more and more specific as we go down. So for instance, we have the emperor penguin up there in the corner, and then underneath my face, I'll move myself, we have the cute little Galapagos penguin underneath, and these are different genuses and they are different species. So the scientific name for the emperor penguin would be Aptenodytes forstereri, and the Galapagos penguin would be Sphenicus mendelicus. Um, Scientific names, very, very hard to say. And even with like anything in science, different people say them differently. So, as long as you know. All right. So we also talked about endemic species. So on here, I have circled on our map all of the different species that are endemic to that area. So endemic means that they only live in that place. So number 10 in the middle there, that's the African penguin, also called the jackass penguin, which makes me giggle. So those only live obviously in Africa. Over here, 9 and 8, we have the Humboldt penguin is number 8, and the Galapagos penguin's number 9. So they only live in those areas. Over by Australia, we also have those endemic species. Endemic species that live in a very specific area, a very narrow range of diet, habitat, different things like that. So we use endemic species as something called an environmental indicator. So we know that if that species starts to go down, there's probably something wrong with that environment because they are built to specifically live in that environment. So if there's something wrong with that environment, we can then look at, all right, what's causing the amount of Galapagos penguins to go down? Oh, okay, so we have an oil spill, or the amount of fish in this area isn't what it used to be. Okay, now what's causing that? So we can use those to look at environmental health. All right, so the next one we have our phylogeny. Move myself over here. So we're looking at the phylogeny. So with this, we have all of the different genuses, or a couple of the different genuses of our penguins, and then we can see where they branched off. So the Impendodites up at the top, the king and the emperor penguin, those are our largest penguins, and they are obviously the most closely related to each other. Then we have the Pygos species, the Sphenicus species, and the Eudipites. The Eudipites, all of those in the bottom, those are all of the ones with like the really cute eyebrows. So you can see how closely or distantly things are related based off of DNA evidence or what they look like or any of those different things. So now We are talking about natural selection. Okay, so we are talking about what actually causes organisms to become different species. We've looked at how we can tell they're different species. We talked about when we can tell they branch off according to their DNA. But now, how does this physically happen? Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at. So, over time, natural selection can lead to evolution. Evolution is a change in population. Okay. Evolution does not happen in one organism. That would be something like like climatizing to an area. So if an organism would, if we talk about like a polar bear, if a polar bear would go to a warmer habitat, it's probably going to shed more fur so it can cool off faster. That's not evolution. Nothing in its DNA changed. Just what it did at that moment changed in order for it to acclimatize. Okay, that's not an adaptation. An adaptation is either selected for or against in an environment. Here we can actually see the whole different like evolution of penguins. So we have a bunch of different species that are extinct. They are no longer in existence. And then we have the ones like right above me that are still in existence. So we have a Galapagos penguin and an emperor penguin. All of the rest of these penguins are extinct. And we can tell on this little timeline down here that they are extinct just based off of that they are no longer in current day. So you can see we have the Cretaceous period, Pleistocene period, all of these different periods of time when these organisms went extinct. Okay, so for this week, our goals are going to be to explore the theory of speciation, how they form, and what modern day environmental changes are driving natural selection. So this is kind of what we're going to be talking about over the next couple of things. And actually, this week we had Earth Day, so it's kind of nice that we're talking about these things in accordance with the environment. So, the theory of speciation is how species actually form. Okay. So, speciation is an isolation of a portion of the population that causes them to stop mating with others. So, if two species no longer can mate, that is going to make them a new species. Down here, we have an example with some fruit flies, and something happened along the lines where the DO, DM, and DD fruit flies their genetics changed so much that they were no longer able to mate with each other. Natural selection is going to drive these changes. A really, really unique example of this is in World War II in London. They were getting bombed all the time. So, what people did is they would actually go down into the underground subway system and hide down there. As people would go down to this bomb shelter of sorts, they would bring with them mosquitoes. Okay. Those mosquitoes populated the London Underground because people were constantly going down there for a bomb shelter, so they had plenty of blood to feed off of and all that stuff. Okay. They adapted for that wet, dark environment of an underground subway system. Okay. Now, there is a species of mosquito that only lives in the London Underground. They are completely separate from the mosquitoes that live above ground. How that happened is the ones that were adapted to live in that cold, wet, damp environment were able to live. So they had some maybe mutations in their genes that allowed them to have those different traits, allowed them to live. They were strong, they lived, they passed on those genes. The ones that were not able to do that died. So now there's a species of mosquito that only lives in the London Underground. Super, super crazy. So, one thing that can cause this is geographic isolation. So, when we have an original population that gets completely separated from another one, that can cause speciation because if I have two species together, they're in the same environment, this group migrates or something happens that they go to a different area like the London Underground. This one is going to keep evolving for this environmental condition. This one is going to keep evolving for a different environmental condition. And eventually, they're going to become so different that they can no longer breed with each other. So, one example of this is actually in the Grand Canyon. So, obviously, over many, many, many years, has been water erosion that has made this canyon deeper, 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 and deeper. So, way back long ago, before there was this big canyon, the north and the south rim were easily accessible to animals going across or even just swimming across the water, but now it's way too deep, way too wide. They can't. So there used to be these two squirrels, the kebab squirrel and the Abert squirrel. They used to be the same species. You can see that they're both the same genus, but they were separated for so long that they became different species. So we can actually see some similarities, like their body shape is kind of similar, but the kebab squirrel, or kaibob squirrel, I'm sorry, is darker, a little bit bigger, and he has those cute little ear tufts. So something about his environment made him beneficial to have those traits. So maybe there are more pine trees there, and those little ear tufts help them to blend in with like the pine needles or something like that. I don't know. But they became separate from originally being one species. So that's an example of geographic isolation. A different type of isolation that we can have is called temporal isolation, or this can also be called reproductive speciation. So we all know that at certain times of the year, certain animals will have their breeding season. So like right now is kind of the end of the breeding season for sandhill cranes, and it is the beginning of the breeding season for turkeys. So a lot of times right now in Wisconsin, you'll see turkeys out full fan. They're breeding with each other. If there was another species or a different species of turkey in the area that bred in the fall, that would be temporal isolation. The ones that breed in the spring aren't going to breed with the ones in the fall because they have different mating seasons. Okay. So we have to look at those things too. We have two different toads over here, and they breed at different times of the year. So they would never breed with each other. Therefore, two different species. We also have different behavioral changes as well. So we have different behaviors. Some birds will do like mating dances, and if one is not receptive to the song of another one or a mating dance, they're not going to breed with them. So these two birds look really, really similar. They are both different types of meadowlarks, but one lives in the eastern US and one lives in the western US. Their songs are different. So they're not going to attract a mate because they're not singing their song.